Thank you so much for joining us on this kind of inaugural settlement day. If people like it, we'll maybe
great.
do something.
It was a great day.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
So far.
So far. We'll see how this ends. But yeah, I think we wanted to keep things small initially, and if it worked out, kind of make this a yearly occurrence. And so far it's been really great. So I'm really excited to kind of end with Joe and Stani. I think we've had a lot of really great conversations today that have given us a lot of food for thought. And we wanted to end with kind of this overarching question of, can Ethereum settle it all? And I think when you think about that question, there's really two parts to that question. There's, can it actually do it, right? Does it have enough of the features, DA and all these other things to do it? And we'll get into that. And then there's also, like, can it actually win, right? Can Ethereum be a big enough magnet to do that? And, Justin Drake gave some thoughts earlier on about that, but I think I'm excited to kind of jump into both of this. But, before we even get there, I think, the title today for this event is Settlement Day. We're going through this huge transition where Ethereum has gone from a single chain to many chains. And it seems to me like Ethereum's success now really depends on its ability to attract as many chains as possible and to really become the settlement layer for Web3. And I just wanted to start with that as a question. Do you guys agree with that? Like, is this really the future of Ethereum? Do we have to think of it as, just gobbling up as many chains as possible? How do we think about Ethereum going forward?
So I think it's yes, and I think so. First, I think the roll-up roadmap has been very successful so far. It still has a way to go, and in terms of the way our ecosystem has evolved, essentially, we build something, we notice a problem, like, hey, CryptoKitties, this thing doesn't scale. Big surprise. And so we encounter these problems. We look at the problem space, we look at the solution space. Lots of different actors compete to find product market fit. And eventually what happens is a solution wins or multiple solutions win, and then we squeeze out the margins out of that solution. And so divergence phase, convergence phase, and we're in our divergence phase, and there's a lot of innovation. So we wanted to implement execution charting a long time ago. We actually didn't have the tools to do that, and sort of ran into a brick wall. We opened it up for tremendous innovation. Ethereum Layer 1 stepped back, reduced its pricing power, enabled lots of Layer 2s to establish themselves and flourish, and create a ton of innovation and modularize the whole ecosystem. So with all of that, now we have the next problem, or problem space, that has emerged, and that's fragmentation. There's a lot of activity that I'm excited about that will solve that. So we have all these great next generation database systems and modules of next generation database systems, and that's wonderful. I love the mega ETH direction. I love the direction of various other technologies. ZK EVM is going to be, ZK and ZK EVM are going to be moving into Layer 1. And I think all of that is good and will flourish. I love, so Justin Drake and Martin Kopelman have been talking about the native roll-ups, where you're sharing sort of ZK EVM defined at the base layer. And I think that's finally a very powerful way to implement execution sharding. There are other use cases too. There are what nation states need for as long as they stick around, even when they shrink up. They're going to need a national, credibly neutral substrates so that treaties can be written in code and staked. Billions or trillions of dollars can be put into smart contracts, and maybe a United Nations of nation states might actually have utility, so maybe they're the adjudicators of a system like that, so we might be able to have treaties that have teeth we might need.
Are you talking about a UN chain, a UN L2?
United Nations chain, absolutely. Even high-value transactions between nation states that don't trust each other's legal systems, those things will probably move to something that's beefy and as credibly neutral as possible. So that would be a rigorously decentralized Ethereum.
That's exciting. And I guess, Stani, as someone who's building on top of Ethereum and has been for a long time, I guess you're now seeing this kind of transition, all of these L2s. Do you think that Ethereum's success depends on it being able to kind of continue to attract as many chains as possible to roll up to it?
I think what's important for Ethereum is to capture users, and those can be, for example, L2s or the actual end users. Eventually, they're end users behind of every chain. And I think those previous talk when they were talking about that there's so many L2s that it's becoming like a meme. But the same thing happens whenever there's some sort of open playground. And I think Ethereum specifically, the way we actually build and write software in this community is open source. People look what everyone has built and compound over that innovation, and you have further and further innovation there. And I think that's what makes innovation thrive. And I think the same thing happens with these L2s, that they are kind of like a open space to innovate or specialize. And I do think same thing happened with the internet. At some point people are saying like there's too many websites, or App Store, there's too many apps. But I think it's kind of like the same problem, is that yes, that there's a lot of these networks, but it's a lot of the same users using them. But as the space starts to grow more and there's more and more adoption, maybe you are actually only a citizen on one particular network without even caring about that underlying network. You're just, using your application, and it happens to be powered by on-chain effectively. So from that point of view, I think what's important for Ethereum is the users. And to get those users, you have to have innovation and different types of use cases. And I think innovation flourishes where you have the most open space. So the more you are restricting, the more you see new things coming out. And that's something that attracted to me to build in the first place, because it was wide open space, right? So when we're first time thinking about not just Aave, but our previous versions of ETHLend, there wasn't really borrowing and lending on chain. There was one decentralized exchange at that time. So there was very little innovation. So you could build so many things and compound over time. And I think for L2s, that's actually very interesting, is that I do believe in the idea of having these native L2s and kind of like more native extensions and have better verification there and speed. But I do think there's a lot of value being able to have an L2 where you specialize on a certain type of use cases. And I think that should still remain kind of like an open domain that everyone can come and build there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and we should definitely chat a little bit more about these native L2s.
Also, it's quite hard to go and deploy Aave on every single chain, but also it's an example of the where we're talking about the liquidity fragmentation as well. Like liquidity fragmentation does exist to some certain level, but once you have, let's say, 1 billion users on chain, and they're like pretty much using all of these different L2s, that matters actually less at that point.
Totally. Cool. So maybe now transitioning. So I think we both believe that we need more chains, even though there's already too many on L2 But I think Ethereum's success depends on...
Have you seen how big the internet is?
It's huge.
It's really big.
Yeah. And so I think... so we want more chains. And so now I guess coming to the question of the panel, can we actually get there, right? Again, there's the question of like, will Ethereum win, right? And this comes to, I guess, maybe the thesis of winner takes most. And do we think that that's true? And if so, will Ethereum be that winner? And then there's also the question of, can it actually accomplish it? Does it have the technical features that we need to get there? And I think, and I wanted to start there. One of the features that we need to be able to scale to thousands, millions of chains is a lot of DA. And Joe, I know that you're working on an L2, and you've probably looked at the gas markets or the blob space markets for writing DA on Ethereum. Where do you think we need to go on that front, and do you think we'll get there?
So it's important to step back a little bit and recognize that all of this is governed by economics and markets and politics, regulation, even regionalization. And so, first of all, as I suggested, the internet is really, really big. And so I like that you said we'll need to get to millions of chains. I agree with that at different layers. I think there'll be good reasons to group things at layers 3 and layers 4. In terms of chains, in terms of which chains I'm going to want to use, there are going to be some high-value chains that are more expensive. Ethereum Layer 1 should get very, very expensive to use at some point because you're amortizing millions of transactions into a single transaction. In terms of data availability, the premier data availability, guaranteed data availability system will be Ethereum Layer 1. In order to be a proper Layer 2 rollup, you're gonna have to settle there and have your guaranteed data availability there. Otherwise, you risk things happening on other data availability systems that can mess up the operation of your chain. That said, there'll be so many use cases that don't need that level of guarantee, and so they'll either be able to operate in a volitional way, where they can choose, in some cases, to use cheaper data availability solutions. And so if it's a game and you're not playing for very high stakes, potentially, there may be no reason to have your game chain settling and using the most expensive guaranteed data availability. So again, it's going to be a market, and there'll be many solutions, and there'll be a graded spectrum of solutions.
So it sounds like check for data availability. We'll get there. We can use Alt-DA for low-value chains.
We're going to need, so the internet, the web, are basically, we access them through screens. They're very two-dimensional. Web3 is going to permeate everything we do. The idea, so I was asked recently, people are thinking of Web3 as these isolated little primitives, NFT primitives, meme coin primitives, DeFi primitives, DIDs, etc. And I was asked recently if I can see any way for these all to come together. And so essentially we're building a re-architecting of all the systems of the world on this new invention of decentralized trust, this new database that we can all inspect directly and build on. And so in that context, where we're re-architecting all the systems of the world, we're going to need literally orders of magnitude more compute resources than the internet has right now. So we can't imagine how much data availability we're going to need.
Wow, that's going to be a lot of computers. One additional, I guess, barrier to becoming the settlement layer of Web3 that we kind of covered today was, UX and the fact that we have chain fragmentation today. Stani, as someone who's building on multiple chains, as you said, you've deployed Aave on many chains. It's a pain to do that. Each deployment is somewhat siloed from the other ones. what do you think Ethereum needs to do to kind of solve this problem as kind of a builder building on top of Ethereum, and do you think it can get there?
In terms of UX, yeah, I think I do think that, like, not even in the future, but let's say like within a year, I think new users should come into on-chain simply by phone number, email, and having it as simple as possible, and then from there choosing how secure they want to have their setup. I just think that's...
They don't pick a chain, they just pick like a security
They go
level.
or actually they just go to an application that they really want to use. They shouldn't really care about like what's the network behind of the... I think we care because we're here, and probably some of the users that come on chain, they believe in this the idea of decentralization and the guarantees that on-chain brings. So I think there's a lot of people that we basically convert into that decentralization movement and will be part of like growing Ethereum community. But I think like normie users, they just need to have at least the same experience they have today on the internet. Like it needs to be just more simple. And I think that's the direction where things are going towards. And you can do a lot of things that really help that adoption, account abstraction, but it is one of those things. But I think there can be multiple steps that we can go further. I mean, it should be so easy that you could simply just deposit into Aave directly from your bank account. Like there just should be so easy access, and we're not there yet, but that's where we should be, as an example.
I don't know if you're here when Carl was talking about depositing money into different dApps, but that was kind of the pitch that he was saying. So it kind of matches what you're saying now.
Yeah, exactly. So there's still like this barrier between here's the traditional world and here's the on-chain world, and here's the like the gap is like it's big because the problems are fundamental because you want to transact like at spot usually, and then things break or you have to figure out how do you get on chain. So that aspect has to go, and then obviously creating a wallet and using behind the scenes using the blockchain without really thinking about it. That all has to be like abstracted away, and you should just build as if like on-chain is just one part of your stack in your whole like app architecture, and you don't need to expose that fully to the users. So that's what I think about UX, and what Joe said about the security is really interesting because now kind of Ethereum has this like light switch flip by approach to security. So you either have the mainnet security or then you go to L2s. But you should be able to apply the amount of security that is sufficient for whatever that use case is. So for example, consumer transactions, social transactions, you want to establish guarantees for, let's say, whatever you want to secure from identity perspective, from connectivity perspective, ownership perspective, but you don't need exact even roll-up type of a security because you want to scale into millions of transactions per second. And I think that's the kind of like a path I want to see for security and then combined with UX. So I think this whole topic probably will be solved in the like near future than anything like further in time. I actually think that like the applications that are non-financial will be the fastest to adopt more users because obviously finance is fragile. It's basically changing quite significant infrastructure for the mainstream users. So that will take a decade at least. But all these like non-financial use cases will kind of like test the limits of UX and basically the abstraction of the blockchain.
Fascinating. Yeah, and I think both of you talked about having different levels of security between chains. And earlier we heard this. We were talking about native proving, right? If you want to have really good interop, and you want to have synchronous composability between chains, then we need we need real-time proving. And one way to manifest that would be to have native proving, because then you have this kind of canonical prover and verifier that maybe Ethereum maintains, and then you have really good trust assumptions between those chains. And this is something that I've heard folks get excited about on one hand with Ethereum, but yet what the two of you are saying is that actually we're going to see a diverse set of chains that are going to have different security requirements, different data availability requirements, and so perhaps
different capabilities too. I mean, we don't want a single monolithic architecture. I love what Mega ETH is going to be able to do in terms of throughput and latency, but we're not going to need that everywhere, and it might have some censorship problems potentially.
Totally, yeah. So there's going to be likely a very heterogeneous set of chains, and so the question then is just, can Ethereum provide those interoperability guarantees that I think Justin Drake was talking about, that we want to use as a magnet to pull in more chains in this heterogeneous world? Or are we going to be forced to live in a world where there's more homogeneity, just so that we can then have those types of guarantees? So I'm kind of curious what you guys think, based on what you're seeing kind of in the kind of ZK prover network space. Do you feel like we're going to be in a place where we can trust multiple different implementations of provers that are very heterogeneous? Maybe we have multiple provers to get around potential bugs, or do you feel like no, we need to standardize, we need to have an opcode in the L1 that basically lets people run copies of Ethereum, but as L2s with insanely high trust assumptions and insanely good composability?
I think we need to think about this as a whole bunch of different problem spaces and solution spaces within those problem spaces, and just try to stop our ecosystem from finding more problem spaces and innovating in those problem spaces.
That's what we like to do.
Yeah, there are just so many ways to look at these things, and when it comes down to it, it's going to be the economics of these different systems, the product market fit, the costs of different solutions for different use cases. And so whether it's, so I think of Web3, essentially. Web3 is what we're building. Web3 is the re-decentralization of the World Wide Web. Web3 is going to eat the whole world, because the whole world is going to re-architect itself on decentralized protocols. And I kind of currently equate Ethereum with Web3. But that's not really true. There's going to be more than just layer 1 Ethereum, even if it doesn't call itself Ethereum, we might start to think of it as roughly the same thing. Essentially, the next generation user interface for this stuff, and I agree that things are coming pretty quickly, is just intent-based. I think it was Hart maybe who said he just wants to be able to press one button, but you shouldn't even have to press a button. You should be, maybe you have to hit the return key, but you should be either typing into your user interface, whether it's a wallet or a game, embedded wallet, whatever, or you should be speaking into the user interface. That gets translated by an AI into an intent description language. That gets sent to a solver network, or multiple solver networks underneath it. Solvers work with market makers on different networks to just get what you want done. And so I know it's relevant and necessary to talk about the mechanics of what goes on Ethereum layer 1s and layer 2s for now. But in 2 years from now, we're probably, maybe even less, we're probably going to have the rudiments of this stack that I'm talking about. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be doing things on Solana and various other networks that we wouldn't properly call Ethereum yet. But maybe we'll even start to call it Ethereum and really irritate some people.
Cool. Okay, so it sounds like,
So yes,
general, we
synchronous communication, asynchronous communication. You just choose what you need for your use case, and you pay for it if you can.
and we think that ultimately, because people will have different security expectations, we'll be able to still compose a very diverse, heterogeneous set of chains that use different proving systems, and ultimately still.
What's your need? Who's your adversary? How well resourced are they? Just pick your solution.
Yeah, and I like to kind of like, I usually put the whole decentralization always on the side when I'm thinking about like protocol design. I try to more think about resiliency and the use case, resiliency and counterparty risk, and kind of how do you build a system that is the most resilient for whatever value you're trying to, or utility you're trying to provide. And I think that's a better approach because it removes the kind of like discussion between like, you know, how decentralized your system has to be built upon, you know, which network, and, you know, does it need to be a roll up, and what kind of different like features, but purely thinking that, you know, if you're building something like Aave, you want to have a system which is just mitigated from any single point of failures, and that can be counterparty risk, that can be smart contract risk, that can be any other type of a thing. And in DeFi, obviously, the custody risk doesn't exist, right? So you self-custody assets, but at the same time, you have then other types of risks translated, which can be a smart contract risk or counterparty risk if, let's say, it's a staking asset that is listed. But on the flip side, governance is also a risk and an overhead, and can affect and decrease that resiliency. So I think that's like a really good kind of a helpful way to think about when you're building, because it really like puts like the rhetoric away and just helps you to focus on like how do you ensure that the system doesn't break.
Totally. So I think we're in agreement that I think feature-wise we think that Ethereum will solve the remaining problems to be a platform that is good enough to settle all of Web3. And so maybe this is a good place to transition to talking about, like, can it actually succeed? Justin Drake talks a lot about, well, Ethereum has by far the best security, 10 times more than Bitcoin. And, you know, I think that's one metric that maybe people building L2s think about, but it's probably not the only metric. And so, you know, what are maybe some other things that Ethereum has to do well in order to be this magnet to keep sucking in more chains to actually succeed in hitting this lofty goal?
So I think one of the biggest impediments to success was recently removed, at least for 4 years. And so I'm politically neutral. I'm Canadian. I'm North American, and in that sense, I'm American. But I think it's on for our ecosystem in the sense that decentralization is consistent with free market capitalism, is consistent with the Western liberal philosophy, and the Republican Party has or at least let's call it the current Republican Party, is not a fan of big government, is not a fan of big regulation, and so I think we're going to have a lot of room to run, so Ethereum, it's kind of up to Ethereum now. Ethereum has had great traction in different places, some in the Middle East, some in Asia, some in South America, especially Argentina. And now I think we're going to be able to do similar things in the United States. So it will be about innovation. Solana's doing great things, impressive technology, still very immature and remarkably centralized, but So Ethereum needs to lean into its strength, which is progressive, rigorous decentralization, permissionless innovation, and if we get that right, if we attract lots of projects, and we don't all day today, you said use cases, which was the closest anyone has said to end user applications for consumers and for enterprises. It's on now for that because we've achieved decent scalability. Yes, we still have fragmentation. We've achieved better usability. We still have intense-based usability to come. That's going to be amazing. We've achieved cheap block space and cheap transactions. And as of a few days ago, it's no longer illegal to build for the Ethereum network in the United States of America. Even though there were no laws against it, it was still effectively illegal. And so that's going to bring a lot of builders, Web 2 builders, into our space to build compelling applications. And so that's all going to drive monetary premium for Ethereum.
Would you say users matter more than economic security?
So I think builders,
in terms of attracting more people to
builders
launch
of
team?
compelling applications matter the most because they're the ones that bring the builders. If you think about it, let's go back to the United States, or so let's say this city. Let's go to New York. Let's say New York City. All we've been doing is walking around underground and sticking pipes together and wiring up the electricity and kicking the pipes, making sure everything works. There have been a few applications. Lens has been at the social layer, Polymarket, et cetera, but mostly we've been preparing to start living our lives above ground. And so the applications are about to come. When that happens, you're going to see a huge number of developers and users, and it makes sense to set up your branch in different cities right now in different regions because Web3 is going to be global. There will be regionalization. There may be an Ethereum that covers France because regulators that I've spoken to in France are worried that Ethereum is too Americanized, that there's too much American control of Ethereum. And so it's possible that there's some sort of balkanization. Eventually that'll heal itself probably. But we're going to be building all these regions of the Web3 world, the online world, and it's going to make sense to have sort of different philosophies, different religions. Ethereum's a religion, Bitcoin's a religion, et cetera. Set up shop and explore the technology. There are going to be a lot of copies of a lot of things around the world, and you need to do that because that's where the people are going to be.
Yeah, to add to that, I think that the best place to build on Ethereum is now the application layer because now there is that scalability and usability that didn't exist, for example, a year ago. Definitely didn't exist like even couple of years ago. So like now, it's even like when I think about things like DeFi, like I tell people to actually innovate on the application layer because that's where you can, go beyond that extra mile. And also, I think that's makes sense from business perspective to build because you can own the user relationship, and that really matters a lot. And I do think that these non-financial use cases will start to emerge a little bit further. And Lens is a great example where once you don't have to apply that full L1 security or roll-up security, you can get very low transaction costs. And down the line, we see more and more these types of use cases. And I like what Joe said in the beginning, that it looks like kind of like you have these different categories of being built from DeFi, and there's other things, but actually it's all in the same kind of it's all in the same network and pluggable. So the actual surface to build is far more bigger than online today, and there's no really restrictions. So you don't need to go and ask API keys and deal with rate limits, for example. there's a lot that you can do with composability and moving liquidity around and composing between different protocols and bringing that better UX. And that's what really the users need. They need smart people coming and just like, you know, building that like last mile and building it really well. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of things come on.
So the more developers are building for end users, then the more other builders will be interested in composing with those builders, and they will come to Ethereum as a result.
Yeah, I just think that it's really good idea to build a really good business on. It doesn't need to be like fully on chain, but like a very good application and a business that uses Ethereum. It's as simple as that. Like the innovation doesn't need to be a new AMM or new lending protocol. And I do see innovation, and I do see it really valuable, but it doesn't move the same amount of needle than, for example, building a really good application. And
the
that
holy grail, building for real users.
Yeah.
Hitting real world use cases.
And the thing is that it wasn't really possible either fully earlier. So now it's actually possible because there is that scalability aspect. And it's getting easier to create wallets. It's getting easier to interact. And the more we abstract away of the complexity and the on-chain piece, it's way more easier to do. So I just think it's a completely new era that is starting now with these consumer-facing applications.
Totally. And it looks like we're getting close to time. And so maybe just to wrap it up, just a kind of a closing question. There was a nice question in one of the earlier panels about where do you see things by the next DevConnect. I'm going to go a little bit further. By the next DevCon, so 2 years. Do you feel like by that point, it'll be clear that Ethereum has kind of won and will be the de facto kind of settlement layer for kind of Web3? Maybe not all of Web3, but it'll be clear that it will win. Do we think it'll take longer to get there? And if so, like what would you like to see from Ethereum to help us accelerate that and win in this regard?
So 2 years from now, things are probably going to get really, really weird soon. If in fact there is a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the United States, first we're going to advocate for a strategic crypto reserve. If stable coins grow massively, which is very closely related strategically to the Bitcoin reserve that's being talked about, there's a chance that the price of Bitcoin will be driven artificially high by actions of the U.S. government. If that happens, it's going to get just so weird because other nation states are already concerned about that, and they're already trying to position themselves. But the intents-based architecture, the user interfaces are going to get very fluid. I don't think we understand the pace of change right now. As we're living in the future is like double or triple exponentials stacked on top of one another with AIs helping us out. And what brings new waves of innovation and new talent into our ecosystem and new users are all-time highs, and that's going to happen pretty soon. We really don't get a lot of influx into our ecosystem until the journalists start covering it, the TV talking heads start FOMOing, and the general public and developers start to pay attention. So all-time highs. We're now able to build end-user applications, and 2 years is a pretty decent amount of time to build some compelling applications that enable people to really start moving into Web3.
Hell yeah.
Either that or no humans will be using Web3 and it'll be all machines. It's probably good for Ethereum.
Yeah, I think it might be even a little bit of both, that there's going to be some amount of AI making these transactions in a couple of years. And it makes sense because on-chain is really a good platform to transact and avoiding that trust component. So it's actually like a perfect environment for those types of agents or services to settle. And I think 2 years is really, as you said, it's such a long time. I mean, it's practically 2 decades if you compare crypto into everything else. And I think we're going to start seeing really a lot of focus on consumer and that last mile. And that's the user experience. And I think once like we get there, like we'll stop talking about UX. Like you'll stop going to different conferences and people talking about UX because like it's done. You know, it's a starting point now, and in a couple of years, it's like everywhere. It's going to be so easy.
Remember when we talked about consensus algorithms all the time?
And that's
stablecoin design.
Yeah, and I think this is going to happen really soon, and you can be part of it. You can be part of the whole story because it's really exciting time to build now. I mean, I've been here. This is my 7th year, and I just feel things are starting. Joe, how many years you've been here?
2011.
That's a lot of years. So,
are you saying I'm old?
Well, not that many. So, but yeah. So it's just like such an exciting time to be here now and build. And I think we have a really amazing community, and a lot of these problems are really solvable. And there's going to be problems that are harder to solve. So I'm excited to see what's going to be the new state after a couple of years.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. Let's please give a huge round of applause to Stani and Joe. Thank you.